What's going on, workforce? Brian here.
Chris here.
And today we're actually doing a slight community feedback, kind of telling our own stories as it relates to Zeppela HQ's You Don't Pay My Sub video, which if you guys haven't seen it, link is the top link in the description. Go check out this video. Be sure to give it a like. If you're not following Zeppela, be sure to hit that subscribe button and check her out as well. So, fantastic community creator, fantastic guest, just honestly one of the, I think, the brightest personalities that we have. And we're lucky to have within the 14 community.
Her whole stream will brighten your day. So if you just are having a bad day, just hop in. She'll lighten it right up.
So to set some context, if you guys haven't seen the video for whatever reason, she essentially tweeted out a couple days ago, basically looking for stories in terms of like giving advice, receiving advice within the world of Final Fantasy XIV. We both watched the video. I thought it was fantastic. And we were like, we should talk about this because we all have our own individual stories to share. And so we thought, hey, well, we have a channel. Let's go ahead and let's continue this conversation over here. And so, Chris, I want to toss to you. Like, do you have a story? What are your thoughts from your immediate reaction to Zeppela's video? And let's dive in.
I mean, first of all, I think one of the biggest points she hits on is delivery. And her delivery is so nice. And so like, even when she's making fun of somebody, even when she puts out one of her how to fail videos, it's very light. It's very fun. And I think everybody thinks they're like that. And then we see that sometimes there's bans and stuff that go out in the community. And so I will say that, like, just to note that delivery is important here. As a player who gets distracted playing other games and stuff, I keep my 14 sub running, but there are times that I hop back in and I feel like I haven't played in a while. And then it asks me if I want the returner flower. I'm like, oh, I really haven't played in a while. And when I do that, usually I'm coming back for a new patch. And sometimes the first instance I run is an instance I run for a guide. And I run it blind, and then I watch the mechanics back. I highlight the mechanics because I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I just know that that character on the screen is not doing it. And I show the guide. And sometimes I'm showing you, hey, here's something you shouldn't stand in. Here's what happens if you do stand in it, because I did. And so like I die repeatedly. So I put my mistakes out there, not only for the, 3 to 7 people in my party, but I put my mistakes out there on the internet for anybody that wants to go see them. And like sometimes as I'm editing the guide, I'm like, gosh, my rotation is terrible because I'm just so focused on the content. I'm just off. And then, but I will tell you, even then it hurts in my own comment section, knowing that I did that so that somebody else could learn from it and not waiting until I run it perfectly because I want the guide to come out as quickly as I'm able to get it out. And it still stings when I see like 4 and 5 and 6 comments like, don't pay attention to this guy. This guy can't even play the game. And it's like, I know, but like the things I'm saying, the mechanics do work the way because I sat there and watched the replay. Like I still know what the skill does. Just because I couldn't get out of it doesn't mean that I didn't know you shouldn't be standing there. And so like
Chris likes to learn by getting punched
even when you
in the
know
face.
that you need advice. It still hurts to get it sometimes. So that's kind of my initial take.
So this video is actually now a surprise intervention. Chris, your DPS sucks. You got to get good. This is me soliciting somebody, like telling you.
And this is from somebody who people in the community may not know whether or not Brian pays my sub. And I will tell you, he does not pay my sub.
I don't pay his sub. No. So essentially, I think one of the things I'd like to kind of touch on from what Zeppela shared, and that's, it's so funny that you bring that up because there's also been times in videos that you've discovered a mechanic and actually got out of it before I was like, Chris, you got to show me how to do this. And we then have like on the opposite side of it, people are like, oh my gosh, thank you. I was like, I kept getting tripped up by that one mechanic because it's like, oh, just do this, do this, do this. I think of the Ruby weapon as a great example of something that it's like, I was like, I am not picking this up for whatever reason. I keep getting hit by this. And you're like, oh, just stand on me. And we just kind of like, okay, move left, move right, move forward. You're good. And it was, so you do have moments in which that, of brilliance. But yeah, your rotation sucks. Get good, bud. I think for me, one of the things I want to kind of pivot on my perspective, especially when listening to Zeppela's video, is that, as what we would consider Zeppela ourselves kind of community leaders in the sense, with having content creation guides, teaching moments, etc. I think when she hits on, it's about your approach. I think that's important. And it's also difficult because I think a lot of this mindset, it existed, you don't pay my sub, existed prior to last year's policy change where it went from a passive, y'all figure it out, you're adults, work it out, to actively, administrators, the moderators, they will jump in and they will take action. And it seems like it's definitely gone from, there was like, it was kind of
Even
like
if the harassment's not in game.
Right, even the harassment's not in game. We've seen that twice already with authors and with Xenos. His stream, like that's been applied, and that's something that's a big conversation. We didn't talk about it here, but it's kind of a part of this conversation. I've always been under the mindset that you don't pay my sub is what I would call casual elitism, and people look at me sometimes when they're like, what? Like, because usually people equate elitism to the high-end, hardcore, clearing the hardest content kind of player, but I call it casual elitism in the sense that you're actually playing a multiplayer game, and you're treating it like it's a single player experience. And this is where I think this conversation, because we were like, we need to talk about this in this game, because 14 in some ways is shifting more to a single player mindset, right? When you look at Shadowbringers with trust systems, like we know, like just from an analytical perspective, there's no value in Chris going and putting out a guide on the dungeon, because where prior to Shadowbringers, people wanted to kind of get a look at what the bosses are going to do. So especially in a year, in 2 years, when they're coming into that dungeon for the first time, they're not, because like I would say people like generally want to do good. You don't go into a dungeon, a multiplayer component going like, I hope I'm the worst one here. This is going to be great. Pull me through, but so we've seen that. And it's like with the trust system, we see that players are going in and using the trust system to kind of get the edge, get that like taste of what the bosses do before then they shift into a multiplayer aspect. And I highly expect that we'll actually see the trust system trickle its way backwards throughout the game, because one of the constant critiques of the game that I've seen, even back when ARR launched, this is, 7 years ago when ARR launched, players were like, this game is a single player game, and then it randomly forces you into a group. The single player component does not teach you how to be into a group. And so there is that especially at level 15, all of a sudden is a stark difference for little parts of the game. Not like the whole thing. It's not like at level 50.
Different.
Yeah. And
for many classes,
and so
warrior, paladin, black mage, white mage, like there are a huge number of classes play intrinsically different when they are running solo content and when they are in group content, and it never teaches you the second one.
Right. And so from my experience, because I've had people like, and I usually approach it as this: hey, if anybody wants any tips, like just let me know. Like, no worries if not. I try to go extremely like, okay, cool. Like because we just ran a dungeon today on the stream with a brand new Sprout tank, and I kind of say, hey, if anybody wants any tips, just let me know. And it took us a long time to do the dungeon, but that's the contract that I signed when using the roulette. I said, give me a tank and a healer and a DPS. I'll take whatever you give me. Okay, this is the situation we're in. It's going to take a little longer than I was hoping for. Not a big deal. I'm going to adjust in that situation, I believe, because I hit RNG party matchmake. All right, I didn't roll sevens. Okay, not a big deal. I'm going to adjust. But I approached it that way. They didn't want advice. They didn't say anything. I left it to be. I've also been, and the question is, and the experience I've also had is that I've also got a Sprout tank on Titan who I honestly, at the end of the day, think he was trolling. Because, it's like all he would do is run around Titan until Titan would spin and hit everybody until we all died over and over and over again. And it was like, started off with, hey, does anybody need any tips? And it's like, hey, just letting you know, like, super, like, we're happy you're here, but, like, it's not an active battle system. Like, you won't dodge his attack. He's going to cleave, and it's like, it's all, like, it's all data-driven if you're going to get hit or not, outside of the few ground mechanics that you can, the game sets up so that you can't avoid. And he just kept spinning and spinning until we all just said, all right, bud, good luck. It's like, you're either trolling us, we're not reading chat. So that exists too. Like so that's an example of mine where I was like, like that wasn't fun. Like, and the question is that as a player, what is my responsibility to a party? And I believe you have the responsibility to, at your best effort, is to give your best effort with the best knowledge that you have at the time and being open for advice. But as Zeppelin talked about, sometimes somebody could give you bad advice. Have you received bad advice before? I've received bad advice. They're like, you want to do this.
Especially about boss mechanics.
Oh, yeah?
Especially about boss mechanics.
Talk about it.
So, I mean, they'll say like, oh, well, you have to back out of that, or you have to run to this side. And it's like, but what's happening is usually is that approach has worked for them in the past, but they're not understanding the underlying mechanic. And so every time they've run to the left, they've lived. So like, oh, well, you just have to run to the left. And then it turns out it's not a static thing. And then we run to the left and we all die. And so like raids are really bad about that. Raids are really bad about, you'll see the same people get hit over and over. And then those people will sometimes blame everybody else. Like they're laying dead on the floor, but it's everybody else's fault.
Right.
Now to people that say like, they just need to run faster to get out of mechanics. You don't really control run speed outside of sprint. Usually that's a latency. Now that latency could be human driven. That could be their reaction time. They're not grasping what's going on fast enough, but it could also be actual latency. It could be like when I was a PS3 player on crappy internet
out in freaking Washington.
There were just bosses that I just got hit by. There were certain mechanics that were just too fast. And so there were just phases where we just knew Chris was going to die. We were just aware of that.
I want to jump in on that thought though. And then when you finally did get off PS3 and on good internet, you ended up getting hit by more things than you were expecting because you were used to pre-adjusting. You had trained yourself on PS3 and your lag for the internet, so that when all of a sudden, same thing happened in 14 and same thing happened in shooters, it was like Chris went to like, oh yeah, Chris has got great internet.
Bad.
Oh, you were worse for a little bit.
Because I knew the order that the mechanics came in on fights like Titan. And so when a mechanic would happen, I would say, next, I think he's going to do this. And I would start running. But now I'm in real time, and that's getting me killed just as badly.
So back to the concept of, especially the root theory or the root thesis of you don't pay my sub. I think that, and Zeppela, I think put it well, pretty direct. You're in a multiplayer game. If you want to have the you don't pay my sub mentality, like at its extreme, right? Like being offended by advice, like at the end of the day, like
if it was truly polite.
If somebody's just sitting here, okay, yeah, let's separate that aspect. If someone's like, hey, you suck, uninstall, move along, don't play this game, they're an asshole, and yeah, report them, absolutely, because you got to train yourself to an approach. So you got to be receptive to the information. And I would say this is how I try to interact with the internet, because the internet can lose a lot of context. Text in a game, just like on a tweet, just like in a comment, can lose tone and context. I say do your best to assume positive intent. Do your best to read every message that you get on the internet as best as possible. You don't go and get yourself, depressed or in a bad mental state, by following this to its extreme conclusion. But read every message as it's basically prefacing with, I love you, you're awesome, you're a great person. Like fill in the compliment sandwich, like especially if it's critique. Hey Brian, and this is the same thing with YouTube videos. Hey Brian, you could do a better job of stating your thoughts clearly, saying less ums, not mispronouncing things. When I read those comments, I read them with, hey Brian, we love you, you're awesome, you could do better at this. And then I fill in the gaps of the compliment sandwich. Even if they're the most rude, there's only a rude way to interpret it. I try to do that so I can assume the best intent of the commenter, because I don't know what they're going through. And this is a real thing. This is like a real thing that I think it's kind of the mindset of practicing empathy towards our other players, especially in like the world is multiplayer. The games I love are multiplayer. It's that you don't know if they've had a bad day. You don't know what they've been through, and maybe they're just in a hurry. It doesn't excuse it. I'm not sitting here saying that we should sit here and give so much grace that it's like everybody can just be assholes to each other and that's going to be fine. But, practice a little bit of empathy. We don't know where they're coming from as well. So it isn't a black and white issue. You don't pay my sub versus like positive advice, negative advice. Like it's always going to be taken in the moment. When I received advice in the past, sometimes it stings, sometimes it's like, oh, dadgummit, I didn't have Hotan up, especially as leveling ninja.
Oh, I feel like an idiot if I don't put my tank stance up.
Yeah.
It's rare, but it happens.
It happens on the tank stance, and we've talked about this, I think, just in our last video, or like a couple of videos.
It drops it when you go into a new instance.
When you sync.
You had it on.
Yeah, when you sync, it's like, thanks, boom. And it's like, oh man, it doesn't just catch you, it catches a lot of tanks off guard, and every tank, when that happens to you and you forget, it's humbling. It's,
Overpower. Why are they not pulling off?
Why are they eating the white mage? Stop. Oh, my bad, guys. Well, let's try that again. Oh man. No. Anyway, Chris, I was monologuing for a
to extend on that, like when somebody's giving you advice and you're trying to decide, do I really want to? Because they don't know where you're coming from. Maybe you're just after a long day. I just want to run my daily roulette. I just want to be done. I'm leveling up a class I don't always play. Whatever. I'm playing on a different computer. I'm playing on a console. I'm trying out controller. Like, there's a number of reasons that you're like, I know I'm not playing well. That's not the point of what I'm doing right now. Fine, right? You've had a few drinks and you want to play. Great, whatever. But I will say, like, the one thing you can take to heart is just stop for a second and ask yourself, if everybody played from the mentality I'm playing, would we clear the content? Mm-hmm. So if you're a healer and all you're doing is healing and they're asking you to DPS or they're asking you to heal more effectively, that's not going to get everybody killed. It's just going to make the dungeon run really slow. And so factor that in. If you want it to run slow, say, no, I'm actually more comfortable with this pace. Thanks for the advice. And really, there's nothing they can do. They agreed for a random party. But if you're just not healing and you're letting people die and they're like, hey, I noticed you were just kind of standing there. Would you mind healing a little more? And they say that somehow, like, really politely, you're wrong. So when you're asking, a tank to do all their self-healing or whatever, they shouldn't technically need to. When you're asking a tank to pull faster, they shouldn't technically need to. When you're asking people to limit break, they shouldn't technically need to. They should do it, but they don't have to. And so just be aware that, like, there are kind of two buckets of advice. There's advice that's like, you not doing this is actively ruining other people's experience to the point where the content wouldn't get cleared. And as Brian noted earlier, sometimes that's content that's required to get through story and things like that. So it's not like they could avoid this. It's not like, well, then just don't do it. I have to. I didn't want to be here either. And then the other side is that, okay, you're just asking people to improve. You're saying, hey, this would go a lot smoother if, this would go a lot faster if, and that advice is a whole lot more optional on both sides. So that's kind of one of the things that is a core distinction in my mind. Like, even if somebody's a little bit rude, if they're asking me to put tank stance on, they're still right. Like, I still can't, I'm going to go and report them for that? Like, officer, they were really rude about saying that I couldn't run around naked punching them in the face. It's like, well, you can't. So, like, I understand that they shouldn't have been rude to you, but you can't, because you shouldn't have been doing it in the first place. So, like, I understand people's frustration if I don't have tank stance on, and I don't really take any rudeness personally. But when somebody starts inspecting my gear and I'm running on an alt class and they're like, you don't even have materia slotted. I know that. I don't care. This gear is getting replaced in 20 minutes because I'm leveling. I'm not going to put materia in it.
Well, especially if you got the leveling gear that's current for the thing, like, you'll end up having just a fine experience.
It's fine.
Yeah. There's been some fun ones in leveling where it's like, I remember back in the day where tanks would like slot no vitality but all strength. And as a healer, it's like I couldn't heal fast enough. Like, I was like, oh, heal, cure.
But it gets those DPS numbers up.
It gets those. Well, I don't know if it does, right?
Strength and crit.
Well, because essentially the question that I would have is like, well, I mean, if I wasn't having to heal so much, could I add my DPS? Like, there's a concept of individual DPS that people like to go for, but there's also party DPS, right? So, like, asking a tank to, like, clemency themselves might not be a bad thing if you're sitting here blood lilying and you're doing these other things. And so overall, the team's party DPS raises it. But I think that it should be slotted into the idea of a pre-formed team. I think the root of what we see here, I think the root of all of this is the RNG matchmaking. I wish there was a way that you're queuing up randomly. Here is what you're agreeing to. You're agreeing to be matched with high-end raiders, sprouts, so-and-so. Like, you're agreeing to say, find me
nice
a team.
People, mean people, people who speak English, people who don't, people with controller, people who don't, people who've played video games before, people this is their first one, people who came from WoW, as much as many people hate them, all people.
Yeah. And you're agreeing to that. And like, if there was some reminder of it, I think Destiny was always kind of interesting because they don't have matchmaking for the raids. They don't, like, they're not going to do it. And as much as players want it, they say, no, we designed the content that you don't want to matchmake, because you're going to get matchmade with people who know this stuff and who don't. And the people who don't, they're going to leave, and you're going to constantly try to find that, etc. Go find your own team. But we'll do guided. It's still in beta. And hopefully we'll update that at some point. But their concept of guided games was you agree, like, it has you agree to terms saying you're going to do this content until everybody agrees to disband. And then for the people who are like, hey, find me an extra person, it says you're going to teach them. You're going to work with them. Y'all are going to get in voice chat, and you're going to figure this out. That's the kind of content and style that we make. And, 14 doesn't require that. It says, yeah, we're going to let it happen. And I think that's the majority of where the drama comes from. I think the majority of you don't pay my sub comes from RNG matchmake me with a party. And I think that's where the trust system will help address that. But it could also make it worse along with the party shifting size, because imagine playing 400, 500 hours of a single player RPG, and then you get into multiplayer content and you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing.
I don't even have that skill on my bar.
Yeah. It's like,
Why would you have enmity generating stuff on your bar as a solo tank? Nobody's ever pulled threat from you in solo content.
Yeah. It's
never happened.
Your Chocobo. You're like, oh no. Anyway, with that, Chris, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up this video?
No. I mean, I think that's kind of our perspective. We talked about this topic before. Seeing community creators get banned for calling people out is a really controversial topic. And I think the core tenet of this, and the core tenet of everything Zeppla said, is all these experiences were with strangers. Nobody is coming out and saying, my friend was really mean to me and I said, you don't pay my sub, and quit. Like, that's not happening. This is all strangers. So, and what's frustrating is, like, if you need to run your roulette, the roulette system, or it's really great to toss you in with strangers as far as, like, my friends aren't online right now.
Right.
So, like, it is a great tool, but it's kind of like, just take it in perspective, just take a step back. And, like, the thing that lets me reset after a bad dungeon experience and then queue up for another one is just remembering, like, what this technology is there for, right? Like, when my cell phone is being really slow at sending a text message, I still have to remember I'm sending words to space and then back down to Brian. And, like, if that takes a few seconds, yeah, last time it didn't and next time it won't, but it's still pretty cool. And so, like, I'll just give it a second. And it's just, perspective is key here. You being mean back won't fix the fact they were mean. So just be the bigger person. And just move on.
All right. I think that's fantastic advice. Be the bigger person, move on. But, if nothing else, if they're frustrated.
Oh, it's hard.
It's hard. It sucks. There's no cure for that pill. It's like, okay, well, here we are.
Especially if they're right. I think those sting worse.
Especially if they're right. All right, guys, for Work to Gabe, thanks for checking out this video. Hopefully you enjoyed. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And again, check out Zeppla HQ if you don't follow her already. Fantastic creator, awesome person. And yeah, I really enjoyed her video. Thanks for making it, Zeppla, if for some reason you're watching this one. All right, for Work to Gabe, my name is Brian.
My name's Chris.
Thanks so much for watching. Hope you have a fantastic day.
We'll see you next time.
Take care. This video is sponsored by me, Ginger Prime. Hopefully you'll check out my podcast channel, Ginger Gaming Radio, which we have lots of guests, lots of great conversations, and even more highlights. Links are in the description below. Let me know what you think. Thanks.